Today I'm going to show you how to balance the Canon EOS R7 on the DJI RSC2 gimbal. Now, what I'm going to show you today applies to all cameras and gimbals, but this is the setup I have. So let's get into it. First off, this is exactly what I have when I just pulled it out of my backpack. So we're starting from scratch here. Everything is set to what they come in, either in the box or in the most compact way. So first of all, I'm going to add the tripod to the gimbal to make it easier to use. So we just tighten that down and unscrew this and fold the gimbal up. What we're going to do is set up the gimbal in a way that I can attach the camera. So now that it's like this, I'm going to unlock all the axes like this and lock just these two. So I want it to be able to spin, but I don't want it to be able to pan or roll. Next, we need to add this little base plate here. So I'm just going to slide this on from the front like that. I'm just going to lock it somewhere in the middle. And then I need to slide this whole platform out this way so I can fit the camera on it. So once it's big enough to put the camera on, we're going to set this to the side. And then the camera, I've already added the lens and the mount because this is what I normally have it with. So this is a Canon EOS R7 with the RF to EF adapter and the Sigma 18-35. Now, something to make sure you do first is to put everything in the camera. So put the battery in, put the SD cards in, and pull the lens cap off. Because any added weight that you add after balancing the gimbal will affect the gimbal's performance and make it harder for it to move the motors. So get the camera in the way you want it for filming. So after I've done that, we need to add the base plate to it. And I've got my little accessory box here. And I'm gonna add the thinner one because we don't need a thicker plate. So flip the camera over. Now, I don't have a cage, so I can't do multiple threads. I would highly recommend getting something to have multiple threads go into the camera itself. The more threads, the better, because it'll stop the camera from rotating. Sometimes I've had cameras where they've come a little loose and have gone sideways on the gimbal, and that's kind of annoying to deal with. So we tighten it down pretty tight. Again, we don't want this to bend on the camera, so make sure it's straight and pretty tight. Now there's some rubber on the bottom of these pads to keep them from moving. So once it's pretty tight, it should work well. Okay, now we're gonna slide it on. Just like this. And lock it down. Now before we keep going, I usually add a lens support. So that's this piece right here. They come with the gimbals. You can put the thread on just like this and put it underneath the camera, just supporting the lens. Force the little Y bracket shaped thing to go right up against the lens and tighten that down. So there we go. Now, you can also do all of this before adding the plate. So you could do this if you want to as well. I usually don't do this. I usually just build it on the gimbal itself, but this is kind of nice. It does kind of reinforce the lens. So you can also just use this by itself if you want, but there we go. So that as a unit is on there. And then we add the cable, which should be right here. Here it is. That should be it for that. I will talk a little bit about some things in that in a little bit. But you want the USB-C to USB-C cable. Plug it into the first port on the gimbal where it shows a little camera icon. And then put it underneath, usually is what I do. And then plug it into where the camera has its USB-C port. Now, depending on which camera you have, it may not support this feature, or it may have a different port. When you get a gimbal like this, it comes with every type of cable that you would need. So USB-C to 4 different ends. So micro SD and I think something for Sony. All the ends that you would need if your camera supports this. Now what this adapter does is allows the gimbal to control the settings of the camera. So from the gimbal app, I can control the ISO, the shutter speed, and from the gimbal itself, I can control the focus and the recording and any features that you would want to. And this is really nice to have. Now, before we do this real quick, I'm gonna flip the screen out in the back. So this is now configured exactly how we want it. Now, as you can see, I unlock the axis right here, and it's tilting forward. What we wanna do is lock all the sides of it, and then make it so this camera is not falling forward. So when I let go, like here, see how it just falls forward? Like that. So what we're first gonna do is point it straight up. See how it's fallen? I don't want it to slam, but it's falling. So what we can do is unlock this top one and slide it back. Keep sliding until it falls the other way. So now it's kind of falling each way. We want it to where it is perfectly balanced upward. Now, if you can't get this to work, it's probably because your other axis or your other side of this is not balanced right. So see how it's falling forward still? So let's get this moved back, move back. Okay, that's better. And now it's still falling forward. Slide this back. Oh, now it's falling backward. Slide it forward. There we go. Just like that. No matter where we rotate this on the tilt axis, it should just stay there. And that is perfectly balanced. So the reason we're doing this is to relieve the stress off of the motors. If this camera was to slide all the way forward, like this, the motor in the gimbal would have to work very hard to keep the camera level. And that will either wear down the motor or it will be too much for the motor to handle and it'll just not work. So the better balance we get it, the easier it will be on the gimbal and the better battery life the gimbal will have. So just balance it, balance it. There we go. Now that that is done, it's falling this way when we unlock that axis. So what we're going to want to do, unlock the roll, lock the tilt. See how it's falling? Now there's two ways we can address this one. We can either move the whole camera side to side on this plate, or we can unlock the roll here and move the whole roll arm back and forth. So we got some flexibility here. Let's unlock this here and see it's falling that way. Oh. What we want to do is have it not fall that way. So we need to move either the camera or the whole arm the other way. So I'm going to move this camera this way. Oh. Like this. There we go. I'm going to lock it. So now, when we move this to different angles, it should not move. There we go. Now, when testing this, I usually do an angle like this because it can tell me easier. If we do too close of an angle, it might not move a whole lot. So do some more extreme angles to see if it's balanced. And just slide it back and forth until you get it. It can be a little tricky the first time, but once you get it, you're pretty fast at it. So there we go. So now, the roll and the tilt are both balanced. So I can move the camera in any way I'd like this, and it should just stay there. Now, if it moves a tiny bit after you're done moving it, that's fine. So don't worry about getting it absolutely perfect, unless you want to. But something like this, it works. Okay, so now that we're done with this, we have the last axis to do. And this can be a little bit tricky because it's not as straightforward as these two. What you're going to want to do is set the gimbal at an angle, or set it straight forward and then tilt it at an angle. And see how when I let it go, it just slides down that way? That means that the center of mass is moved this way on the pan axis. So I can unlock this right here and slide the whole gimbal forward and backwards. So where I put it, let's try right there. And then let's put it like this. Okay, so now the center mass is more forwards. So we need to move it back just a tiny amount. Like there. So now let's try this again. Oh, it's still rolling a little bit. So let's move it back just a tiny bit more. Okay, and it's balanced. So now, let me show you, if I unlock everything and hold it like this, it should be perfectly balanced no matter where I move the gimbal. So the motors do not have to work very hard at all to keep this camera balanced, because it already is. So all they have to do is just move the positioning of the camera, which is super easy for them because they're pretty powerful motors. And now the gimbal's balanced. Now, before we're done, we need to calibrate the gimbal. So you turn the gimbal on. And then for DJI gimbals, it's this way, but your gimbal might work a little bit differently. But you can press and hold the M button and the trigger at the same time for a couple seconds. And then it'll calibrate the gimbal. And it's done. So now the gimbal is calibrated and we can just pick it up and it's balanced and works totally fine. So just make sure when you're calibrating it to do it on a level surface and do not bump the surface. So that is how you calibrate and set up a gimbal. Now this setup process will vary depending on the setup you have. This video is universal across any camera setups. If your camera is not balancing well, and you've just maxed out a certain aspect of it. So like, say the camera just will not go forward enough for what you have. It's just, your lens is too light. What you can do is buy a counterweight pack like this. And I bought this one. It doesn't work very well on this gimbal, but just depending on whatever gimbal you have, get a pack that's compatible. This pack I bought from Small Rig is for the Ronin S, not this RSC2, so it doesn't fit super well. But basically we can attach this to a part of the gimbal and it'll add weight on that side. So if your camera is just simply not balancing perfectly, you don't have enough space, you can get different size counterweights, and either you can screw them on. If you have a camera cage, you can screw it onto the cage. Some gimbals have a first-party accessories you can put on the roll and the tilt axis. So it just depends on what gimbal you have, but counterweights are a great, cheap way to get your camera balanced if it isn't balanced. And they come in handy in other ways too, but if it's just not working with a specific lens, counterweights are probably the answer if you just simply cannot get it to work. So there's different sizes. So this one is 200 grams right here and 100 grams. They also sell 50 grams, and these are the more expensive parts, these weights themselves. It just depends on what little adapter you get. So this little pack costs like $40. So anyway, we can shut this. And then also, depending on the lens, you may want to put a bigger bottom to it. There are lots of other gimbal accessories as well that I do not have. There we go. For example, they have some arms that can go on the sides of this to make it easier to hold a gimbal out like this, or stuff like that. There's accessories you can get from the gimbal company itself. So DJI has something called Raven Eye you can put on the bottom, but that will also affect your balance. So basically anything you do to the camera setup will change how the gimbal balances, but the steps I showed you in this video will show you how to get it balanced no matter what setup you have. So anyway, it's balanced and that's how you do it. Well, that's it for this video. If you have any questions about this camera setup right here or any other equipment I use, please leave it in the comments below and I will answer your question. If you want to become a Patreon supporter, there's a link in the description below if you want to do that. Also, if you would please consider subscribing, that would help me out a lot. Well, again, that's it for this video and I'll see you in the next one.